someone had told me then how it would end, I would not have believed it. So let's look back and see when the first signs appeared. Karen and I had been married for years, and like any couple, we had our fair share of ups and downs. But this was something different. She had started pulling away in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. Our conversations turned lopsided. The easy laughter that used to fill our home just disappeared. In its place was a silence that felt thick, unnatural. At first, I brushed it off as stress. We'd been through a lot. The fire that took our old house, the move into my grandmother's place, which, let's be honest, wasn't exactly the fresh start she had in mind. But something about the way she acted told me this wasn't just about the fire. The little things started adding up. She'd come home late, blaming meetings that, as far as I could tell, didn't even exist. Her phone, which used to sit untouched on the kitchen counter, became practically glued to her hand, and she never left it face up. Then there were the nights she forgot to wear her wedding ring, said she was in a rush or that it didn't fit right anymore. I tried to ignore it, telling myself every relationship goes through rough patches, that we just needed to find our rhythm again. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was the only one trying. The breaking point wasn't some dramatic event. It was the little moments, the everyday stuff. One evening, I asked if she wanted to watch one of her favorite shows with me, something we used to do religiously. She barely looked up from her phone. "No, I'm tired," she mumbled. But later that night, I caught her laughing at something on her screen, fully immersed. And it wasn't the kind of chuckle you let out over a funny meme. It was different. The kind of laugh you share with someone who makes you feel alive. That was it. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. She was slipping away, and there was no doubt in my mind. There was someone else. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I was being paranoid. But the signs were all there. The sudden change in her wardrobe, the way she avoided me, the complete lack of intimacy. It wasn't just that she was tired of being my wife. She was either already with someone or on the verge of it. And I had no idea how to bring it up. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, are you cheating on me?" That's not exactly dinner conversation. So I waited. I paid attention. I started seeing patterns. The way she'd suddenly remember plans. The way her voice shifted when certain names came up in conversation. She wasn't just distant. She had already checked out. She was still in the house, but emotionally, she was gone. Looking back, I think a part of me had already come to terms with it. She made it easy by treating me like I didn't exist. But even then, I held on to the stupid hope that if I just gave her space, she'd find her way back. I know now how foolish that was. But when you've built a life with someone, you don't just walk away without a fight. Or at least that's what I believed back then. The worst part wasn't the suspicion. It was the waiting. Waiting to catch her in a lie. Waiting for her to admit what I already knew. Waiting for her to care enough to even bother hiding it. It felt like I was on borrowed time. Like every moment was leading up to something inevitable. And I think in her own way she knew it too. The night everything finally fell apart started like any other. I got home from work, same routine, same quiet house. It was winter, and the early darkness made everything feel heavier. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Her car wasn't in the garage, and the porch light was off. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but with how things had been lately, my gut twisted. I walked inside and called her name. Nothing. No response. At first, I figured she had stepped out for a bit. But then I saw it, her bedroom light was on. I climbed the stairs and found her standing at the dresser, putting on makeup. But not just a quick touch-up for errands. No, this was different. She wasn't in jeans and a sweater. She wore a sleek black dress I had never seen before, the hem higher than anything she normally wore, the neckline low enough to leave little to the imagination. Next to her, a pair of stilettos sat waiting. The kind of shoes I never thought she'd wear. I stood there in the doorway just watching. She was too busy applying bold red lipstick to even notice me at first. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just a casual night out. She was getting dressed for someone. A weight settled in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "Are we going somewhere?" I asked. She hesitated for half a second before meeting my gaze in the mirror. No guilt, no panic, just pure irritation. "No," she said flatly. "I have a date." I didn't react right away. I think she was expecting me to explode, to start a fight, to beg. But I just stood there, looking at her. She turned toward me, arms crossed. "Did you hear me?" she snapped. "I said I have a date. I'm going out with another man." My heart pounded, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a scene. "No," I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. "No? No, what? You're not going on a date," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Not while we live under the same roof. If you want to be with someone else, fine. But pack your things and go stay somewhere else." I paused. "Once you're out, I'll file for divorce and you can do whatever you want." She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I like this house, and when it's mine, I'll do whatever I want with it. If you keep acting like an idiot, I'll make sure I get most of the money when we sell it." I took a slow, deep breath, gripping the last shred of patience I had left. "Do yourself a favor," I said evenly. "Go stay with your parents until this is over. You're the one who wants out, not me." She smirked. "Oh, I'll be back in 30 minutes, she said. "You better not be here when I get back, or I'll call the cops." She let the words sink in before continuing. "I'll tell them you threatened me, maybe even hit me. You know how it works. They'll hold you for 48 hours, and by then, I'll have changed the locks." A cold anger settled inside me. She really thought she could manipulate me that easily. "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice dangerously calm. She rolled her eyes and turned back to the mirror, muttering something about fixing her lipstick. I walked out of the room, my mind racing. She thought she held all the cards, that she had complete control. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. If she wanted to play dirty, I could play along. In the garage, my eyes landed on the aluminum baseball bat leaning against the wall, the same one I used during summer games with friends. I picked it up, feeling the familiar weight in my hand, but I wasn't going to use it for what she might have expected. Her car was parked outside, ready for her grand exit. I could almost picture the smug look on her face as she imagined driving off to meet her new fling, leaving me behind to stew in my misery. But not tonight. I walked back into the garage and popped the hood. A few minutes later, her car battery was sitting on my workbench. Then, I noticed her purse sitting on the counter. Her phone was inside, and an idea hit me. I grabbed a hammer, lined up the device on the workbench, and with one solid hit, the phone snapped into 3 neat pieces. Satisfied, I slipped the shattered remains back into her bag, minus the battery. She wasn't calling anyone tonight. As I zipped up the purse, something else caught my attention. A small packet of protection tucked inside. For a second, I actually considered poking a hole in each one, just to mess with her. But I let the thought go as quickly as it came. She'd probably twist it into some ridiculous accusation, and I wasn't in the mood for that kind of drama. By the time she strolled into the kitchen, she was fully dressed. Tight black dress, sky-high heels, and that over-the-top red lipstick. She looked at me like she had already won some game I didn't even know we were playing. "Out," she said, flicking her hand toward the door like I was some unwelcome guest in my own home. I didn't move. Instead, I grabbed a cup from the cabinet, poured myself some coffee, and leaned casually against the counter, taking a slow sip. "Good luck with your night," I said smoothly. Her eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" I smiled and took another sip. "Why don't you check your car?" She didn't hesitate. Her heels clicked furiously against the tile as she stormed toward the front door. A few seconds later, I heard her voice erupt from outside, shouting, cursing, absolutely livid. A moment later, she came stomping back in, her face red with rage. "What the hell did you do to my car?" she shrieked. I shrugged, keeping my tone light. "It's parked on the street. Anything could have happened." "You bastard," she hissed. "I'll just call him to come get me." "Go ahead," I said, nodding toward her purse. "You'll need your phone for that." Her expression froze for a split second before she yanked the phone out of her bag, tapping the screen frantically. When nothing happened, her rage hit a whole new level. "You broke my phone?" she screeched. I leaned back, arms crossed. Maybe you should have kept a better eye on it." At that point, she was shaking with frustration. Without another word, she kicked off her heels, swapped them for sneakers, and stormed out the door. I watched from the window as she went house to house, knocking, ringing doorbells, getting more and more agitated when nobody answered. By the time she reached the end of the block, she was practically shouting. I stayed put, sipping my coffee, waiting. It was only a matter of time before she found someone to help, or got desperate enough to call the cops. Either way, I was ready, but things took a turn I hadn't anticipated. From inside the house, I heard her footsteps pounding across the floor upstairs, then silence. That was my cue to check what she was up to. Glancing out the window, I saw her heading toward the garage. Of course, she wasn't the type to give up that easily, and I knew exactly what she was thinking, that since her car was dead, she could just take mine. The beast, as she used to call it. My Suburban. She probably assumed I hadn't thought that far ahead. She assumed wrong. Earlier that night, I'd already disconnected the garage door opener, knowing full well she might pull something like this. I crept toward the side door and peered inside just as she climbed into the driver's seat. A second later, the engine roared to life, the deep rumble echoing through the garage. I thought about stopping her, but then I decided to let things play out. She pressed the button to open the garage door. Nothing. She hit it again. Still nothing. I watched frustration flicker across her face. But instead of stopping to think, she did exactly what I expected her to do. She hit the gas. The beast surged forward, slamming straight into the garage door with a sickening screech of metal. The force was too much for the aging structure. The sound of tearing steel and splintering would fill the air as the beast burst through, dragging the remains of the door along with it. But that wasn't even the worst part. Sitting directly behind the garage in what had to be the worst possible spot at the worst possible time was a police cruiser. 2 officers had just arrived, likely responding to Sandy's earlier threat to call the cops. And now, her reckless escape attempt had just smashed straight into the front of their car. The impact shoved the cruiser back several feet. Its hood crumpled like an accordion. One of the officers had been stepping out of the driver's side when it happened. The force of the crash swung the door back violently, knocking him off balance and sending him to the ground. His partner, a redhead I vaguely remembered from high school, reacted instantly. She was already in motion before Karen could even process what had happened, yanking her out of the car by her hair. "Get on the ground," the officer barked, her voice cutting through the night. Karen screamed, flailing wildly, but it was useless. She wasn't putting up much of a fight, just sobbing, cursing, making a scene as they cuffed her. Meanwhile, I rushed to check on the officer who had been hit. Blood ran down his face from a clearly broken nose, but he was conscious. "Hold still," I told him, keeping his head steady. "Help's on the way." The next 20 minutes were pure chaos. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, some stepping onto their porches to watch. Ambulances arrived, their lights flashing, and more police cruisers lined the street. I answered questions, all while keeping one eye on Sandy. She was sitting in the back of another squad car, wailing like a child caught stealing from a candy store. By the time it was all over, she was on her way to the hospital. Nothing serious, just a bruised ego and a stiff neck from the airbag. But the charges were stacking up. Reckless endangerment, property damage, and assaulting an officer with a vehicle, just to name a few. As for me, I stood in the driveway watching as the beast got hauled away, its front end barely recognizable. I should have been angry, but instead I just felt relieved, because this wasn't just about a wrecked garage or a totaled car. This was proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof, that Karen was her own worst enemy. For all her threats, all her manipulation, all her arrogance, she had finally hit a wall in every sense of the word, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. She sat in the back of the cruiser, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was the one who had betrayed her. The irony of it was almost laughable. "You're leaving me with nothing," she spat. My lawyer didn't even blink. "That's not entirely true. We're willing to let you keep one of the bedroom sets. For nostalgia, I could practically hear her teeth grinding. Without a word, she spun on her heel and stormed out, leaving her lawyer behind to negotiate the rest. When it was all said and done, she walked away with her car, a chunk of the money she had pulled out and not much else. Her lawyer had seen the writing on the wall and convinced her to settle before she made things worse for herself. The judge didn't mince words when finalizing the divorce. He actually commended me for being proactive in protecting my assets, which was just a polite way of saying that Karen had been outplayed at every turn. By the time the gavel came down, I was free, and she was stuck dealing with the legal mess she'd created when she plowed my truck into a police cruiser. For me, it had never been about revenge. It was about survival. Karen had tried every trick in the book: manipulation, intimidation, outright bullying, to take everything from me. She assumed I'd just roll over and let her have her way. She was wrong. I played the long game, and when it was all over, I walked away with my dignity intact. Once the dust settled and the ink dried on the divorce papers, I finally had a moment to just breathe. It felt strange at first, almost like I was stepping into someone else's life. For years, everything, my routine, my thoughts, even my happiness, had revolved around Karen and our marriage. And then, just like that, she was gone. The house was quiet, but not in a lonely way. Felt peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't tiptoeing around, waiting for the next argument or passive-aggressive jab. I spent those first few months getting my life back in order, fixing up the house, reconnecting with old friends, and picking up hobbies I had let fall by the wayside. It wasn't about keeping busy. It was about reclaiming the person I had been before everything unraveled. One of the first things I did was head back to the shooting range. It had always been something I enjoyed, but in the last few years of my marriage, I never seemed to have the time or the energy for it. And that's where I ran into Sergeant Sweetie, the same officer who had arrested Karen the night she wrecked my truck. She wasn't in uniform this time, just jeans and a casual top. A completely different look from the no-nonsense cop I'd met before. We started talking, just casual conversation, and I found out she was single too. Her divorce had been rough, though nowhere near as dramatic as mine. One thing led to another, and I asked her out. To my surprise, she said yes. That first date was something else. I probably overdid it. I showed up in my best suit, wanting to make a good impression. But she seemed to appreciate the effort. From the start, she made it clear she wasn't interested in playing games or getting caught up in unnecessary drama. And honestly, neither was I. 9 months later, we got married. And I can say, without a doubt, that these years with her have been the best of my life. She's not just my wife. She's my partner in every sense of the word. We built a life together rooted in mutual respect and trust. 2 things that had been missing for far too long in my first marriage. As for Sandy, I'd hear little updates about her from mutual acquaintances now and then. She ended up getting married twice after me. From what I gathered, her second husband managed to keep her in check. Good for him. I don't hold any anger toward her anymore. Took me a while to get to that place, but I realized that holding on to resentment would only keep me stuck in the past. And the past is exactly where she belongs. These days, my life is simple, fulfilling. Just last week, my wife and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary with a river cruise in Europe, something she had always dreamed of. Our kids are grown, happy, and doing well, and I couldn't be prouder of them. A few months ago, we passed my grandmother's old house down to our daughter as a wedding gift. It felt like a full-circle moment. That house had been a place of so much pain and transition, but now, it was starting a new chapter for her. Every now and then, I think back to those chaotic days with Sandy. Not with regret, but with gratitude. Because those years, those hard, messy, painful years, taught me a lot about who I am and what I'm capable of handling. Life doesn't always go the way you plan, but sometimes, the unexpected detours lead you exactly where you're meant to be. And standing here now, with the life I've built, I wouldn't change a thing. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.